In this video series, I'm talking about influencers, the men and women that God used in my life to influence my faith journey. So when I was a senior in college, I'd already been doing youth ministry for a couple of years, and the biggest influences on my teaching style at the time were Doug Field's purpose-driven youth ministry and similar seeker-friendly topical teaching-based churches. But one day my friend Christy gave me 2 tapes. Yes, I am that old. These tapes were from Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. She said that her dad had been in a men's Bible study and they were listening and discussing sermons by a pastor in New York City named Tim Keller, and she thought I'd like them. The tapes she gave me contained 4 Tim Keller sermons on the last week of Jesus' life. I listened to them over and over, and I was amazed by Keller's ability to explain the Bible. I was impressed by how it seemed as if there was never a word out of place in his sermons, as if he had carefully chosen every word of the sermon. I was impressed by his scholarship, how he seemed to have read so many books and articles and knew how to skillfully weave them into his sermon. I was impressed by his trust that the Bible preached clearly was enough to capture someone's attention, that he didn't need to give some fancy introduction in order to grab the listener's attention. But most of all, I was amazed at his ability to bring every sermon back to the gospel, to Jesus' death on the cross for our sins. I began to subscribe to the Redeemer tape ministry, and every other week I'd get a little package with a tape inside with the sermons from the past 2 weeks. And I continued to be amazed at how every week, it didn't matter what Keller was preaching on, he'd always lead his listeners back to the gospel. Not in a forced or unnatural way, but in a way that convinced me that all roads truly did lead to the cross of Christ. And over time, I steadily began to move away from topical, felt needs, seeker-friendly types of preaching to one that would be careful in the words I chose, to a style that would draw upon many other sources to illustrate what I was saying. A style that trusted that preaching the Bible clearly was more important than any gimmick, and most importantly, a sermon style that always led my listeners back to the gospel of salvation by grace. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16, Paul is writing to his protege Timothy, and he says, "Watch your life and your doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers." The longer I've been a pastor, the more it feels like I'm running a marathon with snipers on either side of me, just trying to take me and my friends, my fellow pastors, out. I've watched over the years how some of my friends have left the pastorate because they did not watch their life closely and fell into serious sin. I've watched other friends leave the pastorate because they did not watch their doctrine closely and strayed away from orthodox faith. Over the years, I've come to truly appreciate and honor pastors like Tim Keller, who stayed faithful to Jesus and faithfully preached the gospel until it was time to retire or be called home. I thank God for Tim Keller's influence on my life, and I know that I would not be the preacher that I am today if it were not for his example.